Let's stop the magic! Let's stop the sun!
Welcome to Innovation Insiders. My name is Andy Ford. We're coming to you live from Brado's HQ here in beautiful downtown St. Louis, Missouri. I almost mean that this time. It's almost pretty right now. It's April and God has forsaken us. It is cold and things are awful. But I'm sitting here with two colleagues. It makes it warm and sunny inside this tiny little booth. I'm here with Diane Schumacher, and I'm here with Jeff Berry. Hi, guys.
Hello.
Good afternoon.
So, welcome to our, or good morning, or good day,
morning.
or wherever you are,
whatever time of day it is.
In this, so this is the culmination of the pilot season for us. And so, if you joined us last week for our first episode of part 2, we talked about some of those things that caught us off guard, some of those things that we expected to hear and heard, some of those things we didn't expect and got in return. And so we had an active listening drill against all 11 episodes that we had, and really gave us a chance to dive in deep and think about our guests and what innovation stories they had and what it meant to them. So thanks for joining us for our second episode that concludes this pilot season. Once again, we're not available today via email live. However, if you would like to get in touch with us, you can feel free to send us an email at innovation@brado.net. You can follow me on Twitter at aford, or you can follow us on Twitter, Brado, at Brado Insight. So once again, we've got a really good, full-packed show for us today. And I want to kick off with one of those things that I think we've had a chance to banty around quite a bit, was favorite show moments.
And quotes.
And so, Diane, I just want to start with you. Is it what's been one moment that really stood out to you? It was really pretty cool.
Do I have to do one?
I
honestly have 3. As usual, I have a lot to say. But, you know, I think part of it was the whole Mitch Meyer learning about cannabis and understand. She called it the new internet. And I never really thought of it that way, but it's at its infancy and it's really exciting, and there's all these nooks and crannies and things that are happening. And then she hit it with this one quote that said, you know, all those moms in the parking lot, at the carpool parking lot, have a vape pen in their pocket and a couple of gummies. I mean, how do you beat a conversation like that?
That was that, and the minute Mitch said that, I remember that moment as clear as a bell, is I honestly pictured that drive-through for school. I mean, like pickup for school. That's that yoga pant wearing mom who's sitting there and just taking a little edge off, or you know that what was the what's the sativa or the indica, like those different strains that we kind of talked about. Which one is the one that calms you down?
I don't honestly.
Was it sativa?
I can't remember which one does what, but the idea of it being part of a morning ritual, which we heard a lot about, like, you know, I do this, I get up, I do my hair, I have coffee, and then I get on my vape pen or whatever it is I'm going to do. So,
but it was about finding that feeling of choice.
Yeah.
Right.
Which was just...
Well, and the cool thing about it is the innovation in the space, the vaping or the gummies in the cannabis space allow that moment to happen almost, you know, without anybody knowing it's happening. You're driving away and you pop a gummy or you're doing it. So it's the innovation in the space, because you wouldn't be able to do that because you'd look like Cheech and Chong going down the street, 10 years ago.
Right.
Yes. But a gummy.
Right.
A gummy is you know what's interesting, that reminds me of Val Toothman's interview too, is when she talked about like chasing that mood, looking for that enhancement. I think we've heard that a couple of times, is that the mood or the enhanced moment is something that I think a lot of companies are trying to deliver.
Right.
And I think not just trying to, are actually delivering on. So that was a key moment. I love that interview.
It was. And think about, brands like Corona, who went from just a clear bottle Mexican beer by putting a lime in it, creating this ritual that created this experience. So there's all these things going on right now in the innovation world that are so exciting, but you think about creating experiences. This cannabis story just blew my mind.
You know, the funny thing about those vapes, for example, is that when you look at those things, I mean, and I forget one of the companies we visited in San Francisco was that clean looking, it looked like something Apple produced. I mean, it was a classy Bloom. Was it Bloom Farms?
Yep, Bloom Farms.
I mean, that you wouldn't, first of all, I wouldn't have known that was a vape
No, me neither.
until you said, look, that's got a concentrate in it, and this is what it does and delivers. I mean, it's in home in an Hermes bag, a Coach bag, sitting inside
Right.
a BMW or SUV. It doesn't look out of place
And,
at all.
designed to look like that, right? Designed to fit that moment, too.
Yeah. Yeah.
The gold and the rosé colors.
Really pretty cool.
Yeah.
Really. No, by the way, we are not sponsored by Bloom Farm
No.
at all.
No.
It was just a moment in the show.
That's
so,
right.
Not that we would turn it down. Let's jump that opportunity
I mean,
there.
I don't want to cut it off.
No.
So,
No.
Jeff, how about you? What's been one of those favorite moments?
I love stepping back from this and thinking about the culture of innovation, or what innovators go through on a daily basis, and kind of peeling that layer back. And Rose, when we interviewed Rose, she talked about what innovation is and what innovation is not. And too often innovators get, stigmatized as just these crazy people who are coming up with just wacko ideas. And she was really clear, and she said, innovation is about fundamental change for the better. It's not just about changing something because you can change it. And I think the example you were just given about making that cannabis experience better, or making the beer drinking experience different, creating a different vibe, is what she was talking about, because she said it's about product, culture, and process. And that innovation is about making those fundamental changes to those things that make your life better. And it was that last piece that I really latched onto and said, that's what people need to understand about innovation, is we're not just trying to do crazy things and do the most unique thing we can. We're trying to change for the better. So
I just came from a client meeting, and it's funny we're thinking about this. It's like, we do these projects, and here at Brado, there's a number of clients that we work with, from pharmaceutical to pet care to beer to cannabis. We're all across the board. And whether we're looking for an insight or trying to find that behavior or mood to tap into, it seems to me that we're always pursuing the tension, the problem, the issues. And not that that's a bad thing at all, but it's not just for craziness sake, like you just said, Jeff. It is looking for, and I'll just go back to the mom and sitting in the carpool, is, maybe it is a calm moment, the calm before the storm. If you've ever picked up kids, yours or others, had them get in the car from a day of school or a drop-off, you might need that moment of, let me get a little piece here, or let me get myself up a little bit before I have to go to my next event. I think finding the problem and then helping a client or a customer, a consumer, define it the most emotive way. We heard a lot of that from our guests this year.
absolutely.
That's right.
Which was kind of neat that they all sort of talked about it in different ways too. I'm going to take a pivot on that real quick, because we often talked about the consumer, their customer, the tension, their problem, but I think we also heard from an innovation point of view, back to your point about culture, is it trying to get ideas through an internal lens. That was a whole nother set of problems, wasn't it?
Right.
Absolutely, and it's a great segue, which is one of my other favorite moments was David Weaver. He said, don't put someone inside the machine that's trying to break the machine. And it goes to that idea of what innovators deal with all day long internally as they're trying to do their thing. Whether it's a small company, whether it's here at Brado where it's 50 people or it's 5,000 people, we're constantly trying to break the machine in some way. And there are political consequences that we as innovators face every day for those decisions and those thoughts. And so listening to people, how they navigated that and were willing to fight through it and do what they felt was right against those odds was really just inspiring for me too.
And that was where a lot of that conversations came about salesmanship.
Right.
Not only
Right.
do you have to do that, but you have to sell it, because they have to believe you. I mean, you're speaking for their customer in many ways.
Right.
You're the only one speaking. You're the voice of the consumer in many ways. So you don't sell that,
Nobody is going to buy it.
nobody else
Right.
is going to take it.
Diana, I meant to ask you this. I mean, you spent, and Jeff, you did too. You both spent time at AB, right? Working in, bringing a lot of brand messages, to life through advertisement, through packaging, through new products. And speaking about some of those cultures, not to bring up companies we've worked with in the past and say these are problems that they had, these are issues that they had. But you worked at Nestle, you've worked there, you've worked here. Just from your own personal experience, and not just at other companies, but also as consultants, do you find that you have to navigate carefully the halls of those different companies to find out which is the right trigger or the right key to get the ideas sold? Is it different for every company?
Wow, that's a deep question. I don't know if you have to navigate the halls, but I think you have to be able to, just like you do in innovation, to be able to read the situation. I mean, you have to understand who you're talking to. No matter if it's internal or external, you have to understand. You have to get to know them. You have to get in the trenches. That was something that Rose talked about in her anthropological point of view, but you got to get in the trenches, and Mitch alluded to the frat house environment of being in a beer company and being a woman in the beer company, and I can speak to that. In fact, there was a time when they put all the women in innovation. It's like they didn't quite know what to do with us, so they put us all in innovation, and it was quite an interesting thing. But again, you adjust and you work, and that doesn't mean you're not being sincere. It means you understand and you comprehend, and you talk to them in a meaningful way.
And using the language that they would use.
Exactly.
You're nodding your head on that, Jeff. That's sort of similar mindset there.
Oh yeah, absolutely. And I think it's less about finding the keys and about finding the right people.
Oh, yeah.
Because you can go to a particular department. Just say it's R&D, and you're going to have a bunch of no but kind of people, and you're going to. The trick is to find those few that are yes and people. Find them, and they'll take you where you need to go, right? So I also think the culture at different organizations is very different. At Anheuser-Busch, it was very different than it was at Nestle. People at Anheuser-Busch, everybody lined up and said, let's figure out how to make this happen.
And have fun.
Right, let's have fun, and
that was mandatory.
Right, we will move heaven and earth to make something happen.
It's really interesting too, is that I think that you both talk about understanding the situation that you're in, and then finding those people. And I think somebody in our group said, the crazy ones. You got to
right.
Matt talked about you're looking for, and now he was talking about finding somebody who could help moderate for the filament. But it was the same mentality. Is you got to find a yes and in some cases is some version of crazy.
It is some version of crazy, and no matter what department you're in. Even if you're in the most linear thinking department, there's a crazy there.
Which I think we found all the crazies. This is the interesting thing to me is that the other thing, and I'm going to go to break on this one, but I think it's sort of something that stood out to me was I felt like inherently the people we interviewed were sort of like what I think we just described, is that we went and found those other characters who collected personalities and caricatures of getting stuff done and doing different types of things. They were all collectors of crazy people, and not just crazy in a bad or an outlandish way, but a really interesting way. I mean, that's another common piece that really stood out to me from this, was that everybody was infinitely interested in people. Mm-hmm. So you're listening to Innovation Insiders. I'm here with Diane and Jeff. We are the innovation team at Brado. We're going to go to a quick break, and when we come back, we're going to talk a little bit about the Innovator's Confession. Talk a little bit about some of those things we heard that really stood out to us and some of those tantalizing confessions that we received. So stick around. We'll be right back after these messages. Welcome back. I am here with Jeff and Diane. We are part of the innovation team here at Brado, and when we were going to break, we were going to talk about what has typically been our last segment of the show, which is the Innovator's Confession. Diane, before we get into that, I want to talk about the birth of this thing.
Yes.
Is that when Diane has helped, as Jeff has, producing the show throughout this season, but when we set it up, I think this was your baby.
For the confession?
Yeah, talk about that.
Yeah, I'm a Vanity Fair magazine junkie. I mean, I do everything online, but I have to have my Vanity Fair magazine.
In print.
In print, in my hand. It's a beautiful thing. So, at the very end, the last thing they do on the last page of the episode is called a Proust questionnaire. And it's standard questions that are like 30 questions that they ask their guess. And same questions, but I never miss it. And I thought, what an effective, fun way to do it and to see if there's differences, see if there's similarities, and boy, did we get some surprises.
Yeah, this was been one of my favorite sections. And matter of fact, I'm going to hold it up right there so you can't see it on the radio, but for what we're filming, this has been the sheet. It started off with 8 questions, right? Now, just to kind of set the stage on, this was a 9-minute segment. It's the shortest segment typically in the show. Never got through 5 questions. I mean, honestly, always got stalled. But it was some of my favorite moments from the conversations we had. So I'm going to start with Jeff. Jeff, what was one of your best or top confessions that you heard?
I think one of my top confessions was or that we talked about what's going to catch us off guard in the next 5 years,
right.
and one of the things that I took away from that was that idea of returning to personal connections.
Well, take mine.
Well, good. Then we can collaborate,
I'll just
as
sit
innovators should do, on this. But that idea of returning to personal connections, I think we're in a world that is so hyper-connected in technology, in good ways and in bad, and that we've lost that just human, physical, biological need to be with other people, and that there was a lot of that conversation that happened throughout these interviews where people talked about creating empathy and getting back to those personal connections, whether it was delivering products that way, learning that way, or testing or iterating that way, was back to that personal piece.
Agree. And to sort of like segue off of that, one of the things that Rose talked about was just the return to common courtesy.
Right.
To talking to people, to have customer service. And if you think about brands like American Express, who always prides themselves on you will get a human being, although lately I'm not so sure. But anyhow, they have always hung their hat on something like that. You will get a human being. So I don't know if they were ahead of the game or it's just something that they've always offered, but it fits into what they were saying about common courtesy, about humanity, in-person connections, which is really good if you're facilitators like us.
Yeah. Well, and what's funny is the tech companies know this, because how many of us are getting the robocalls now on our cell phones, and you answer it, and the person on the other end sounds so incredibly real. It takes 10 seconds before you actually realize you're talking to an AI bot. And you're not talking to a human being, or at least, all right, there's my confession is, I think I'm talking to a real person and for the first 10 seconds. But it tells me that the technology companies understand that personal connection has to be there, and they've worked really hard to create it.
Are you the kind of kid who, were you the kind of kid who used to call the bank for time and temperature just to hear the voice?
Well, yeah, but there was also one that you got sports scores from.
Honestly, I'm from a small town. I'm not sure I'm from that small.
I actually kind of miss that. I remember
Time and temp.
Yeah.
I ask Siri every day what the weather is. I like the voice. I like to the personal connection. By the way, I've changed Siri's voice, so I don't have that annoying.
I apologize to our audience for these pathetic individuals. How sad you two are.
Oh, yeah, we're sad. I like it. Here's my counter to that.
Yeah.
Is that I absolutely agree that's what I heard from our interviews. But I think built into that is the zig when everybody else is zag sort of mentality. Is that I think in the realm of big data, you just talked about NLP, natural language processing, and AI and all that, tech coming into real personalization, I think innovators naturally go, what's happening over there? I'm going to look to the left. Everybody else is staring right. And I think, by the way, that's the reason they're in the job they're in, is that they are constantly going, it can't all just be, right here. There's got to be a counter to it as well.
And yet a lot of them complimented the idea about nowadays the amount of data available is phenomenal and very helpful.
Agreed. They weren't anti-tech
as a tool
at all.
to support what we do.
No, they weren't anti-tech at all. But I agree with you. I think that the idea of personalization, of real people being involved, is sort of ironic when you think about 7 billion plus people on the planet, and something that catches us off guard is real relationships. And that catches us off guard, but it was, sort of revolutionary.
And it also comes back to the fact that at the end of the day, the real human being is the one that's going to lay down a credit card and buy whatever it is.
Yeah.
Technology's never going to buy things from one another.
Or will they?
That's right. Okay, Hal.
Well,
I don't know.
Diane's got her tinfoil hat on.
I'm looking the other way.
Right? You're zigging and zagging.
I am.
So one of the things that I also wanted to touch base on this, and one of the questions we asked that I thought netted out on some pretty interesting and differentiated results was, what are the top 3 words to describe an innovative individual? Now, for me, I heard things like disruptive, continuous improvement, which is not one word, but I think we gave them some license to do those things. I expected to hear some of the same terms over and over, but I don't feel like we really did.
No, and in fact, I had some things here like fearless. Go after that idea, sell it. When you get a no, turn it around, redress it, and get it back out there. You know, that plays into the persistent or the passionate. In fact, Rose said, you have to have the energy to keep running even when they have billy clubs and they want to beat your head in. So how great is that? And bullheaded, moving the needle forward. To be the first through the door, you always get the worst of it.
She, it's interesting when I heard Rose, think about, and I think somebody else said courageous was another word, to put a cap on that. And, to hear you guys talk about being the person who's selling that, the same, thing that we've heard Mitch say, but you guys talked about it in your own careers, knowing that selling an idea requires a little bit of sticking your neck out. I mean, not a little bit, a lot. And so, somebody talked about the first person off the cliff, wait and see what happens to them.
Right.
To me, it feels like a lot of the personality pieces that are required to be an innovative individual is a willingness to go it alone sometimes.
Oh, I agree. I mean, there's the 3 P's of marketing, and for me, there were the 3 P's of innovation as I went through those. And it was, about being passionate, about being positive, and about being persistent, which is you have to believe in what you're doing. You're going to have to fight through the bad days to get to the good, and you have to keep going and don't let anybody stop you. And so, like, those 3 P's to me felt like they kind of summed up a lot of what we were hearing about those personalities and who they were.
And one of my personal favorites from Rose, I think we have a lot in common, is to be open.
I think people want to have a lot in common, don't you?
I think so. She said you'll never age if you stay open. I'm glomming onto that. I'm liking that.
It is interesting to me, and I'm going to peel back a little bit. I could talk about your 2 careers and the things that you guys have helped create. But that piece that you just mentioned lends me to a kind of a conversation about Rose. And I've mentioned this in the show, but Rose actually had a couple articles written about her as knowing men better than men know themselves, right? And I think to my career, I know for you, Jeff, I know with you as well, is that we've all helped create or dig into brands that we have no connection or correlation with. And I mean, I know I helped work on products for feminine care, and I honestly should not even be in the aisle for that. I don't have any idea what's going on. But when I think about those kinds of words they identified, and that curiosity, and you'll be ever young, it seems to me that this is the kind of profession that requires you to be kind of dumb when you start about a product or a process, and then be willing to learn and face stupidity over and over again until you might have a clue.
And fail.
And fail too.
And another word, be humble.
Oh yeah.
They said, you have to be willing to realize that you may not have all the answers.
Right.
Or you may go in with a hypothesis. How many times have you worked with people or yourself where you go in and you go, oh yeah, I got this figured out, and then you go, whoa, WTH, where did this come from? Okay, I'm listening.
Yeah. I just love that. I mean, that's one, if I could boil it down into 3 traits, and I won't, but I would. One of those pillars would be humility. And I think as a cocky salesman innovator, it's something that I have a contrast with, is that part of me wants to walk in and go, got the answer. Come on, get on with me. Let's go. And the other part of me goes, I don't have a damn clue. I have no idea. What do you guys think? To me, I heard that come across in the radio. is that people are like, it's two sides of the brain going, yes, no, contrast, I don't know, maybe.
Right, it's the old know when to hold them, know when to fold them. Because sometimes you may have to fold them or put it on the shelf. You may bring it back later.
Yeah.
And it may be a big hit, but you have to be able, again, read the room, read the cards, understand what's going on.
Right, and the key is to be okay with either of those scenarios.
Mhm.
Right.
Isn't it funny is that, when I think about this, is that you think about all the other jobs you could have in marketing, and a lot of them require you to be very strategic and very forward thinking and planning and planning and planning. I can't think of another job where you have to be as present as you do to be an innovator.
It's funny you say that. We used to have this conversation all the time when I was at Nestle in our innovation group, and the conversation was, once people got onto the innovation group and spent a couple years doing that, the idea of going back to brand management was just horrific for them. Like, I've gone and I've seen this and done this, and going back to that, while I enjoyed it at some point, I don't want to do it anymore.
All right, so this has been just I love this conversation. We got to go to break. When I come back, what's our next section, Diane? What are we
Our
talking
next
about?
section is,
Advice.
what's
Advice.
your parting advice?
All right, so we're going to come back. You're listening to Innovation Insiders. I'm here with Jeff and Diane. Stick around. We'll be right back, and we're going to talk about some advice and then eventually get to some next steps for you, the listener. We'll be right back. Welcome back to Innovation Insiders. I am your incredibly talented host, Andy.
Humble. There you go.
And humble.
Humble.
That's right.
Humble, lowly Andy Ford with two lesser thans, Jeff Barry and Diane
Ow.
Schumacher. This is the final show of this pilot season. And when we sat down 3 weeks ago, and started talking about themes, what we heard, what are our next steps, one of the things that we decided was, what's your parting advice, right? And so I'm not going to start because I love my parting advice. It's not mine, but I got it from somebody else. But I am going to go to Diane. Diane, what, you're out there, the listeners who are, or maybe they're watching us on YouTube, what would be your advice from all the interviews you heard?
My advice is, if you listen to any of them or to this, it seems like a lot of fun. But this may not be for you. You may actually suck at this. And maybe you just have to say, okay, I'm going somewhere else. Because you have to be, we talked about some of these words, thick skin. I'm talking about the negative now because we've talked about some of the great part. But not a quitter, passionate, courageous, but most importantly, empathetic for your target, especially, whether internally or externally. You have to really have some love of them. I forget, I gotta find this one quote, but Brody said, I love people, I love puzzles, I love problems.
Oh, yeah, that was good.
And I thought that
That's
was
3 Ps.
awesome.
There you go. Yeah.
That's not your quote, is it?
No.
No,
He had
no.
the 3 Ps earlier. He talked
Okay.
about, but I like the people, the problems, and the puzzles. And I want to build on that. And one of those things that it's just not for everybody. And I think one of the main reasons it's not for everybody is because it's messy.
That's right.
Yeah, it beats you up. It's like being an actress.
Well, think about the number of projects where, I won't even mention client names from our point of view, but you just can't walk in and say, we're going to repeat process A. No, it's a complete, depending on who's in the halls, the consumer that we're talking to, the issues that we're facing, and we may need to break something, fail, stand back up and go, man, that was a pilot that didn't work.
Right.
And some people don't, I'm pointing, some people can't handle that. Some people like the idea of, this is the process I go through.
Yep.
And that process begats an outcome.
Yep. When I go speak on innovation, my very last slide has a straight line, and then in the middle it's like a million little circles just jumbled all over the place, and then it finishes with the straight line. And I just try and leave my audience with the idea that this is what innovation will feel like. If you're doing it correctly, this is what it will feel like to you. It's not going to be point A to point B. It's not a linear process, and if you assume that it is, you've probably done something wrong, or you
Right.
haven't pushed hard enough.
Right.
So that's how it's going to be.
This might not be incredibly comforting for all of our clients if they came in, if we said, hey guys, guess what? It's probably going to get messy before it gets better. But in all honesty, you have to have that personality that's willing to say, I don't know, let me talk and find out what people want, and then we're going to try something, and then move forward.
Yeah.
But to counter that a little bit, I think we find positivity in that too, because like we run a drill called Chaos when we do ideation, and people like that drill. It gives them permission to get messy in the middle.
Yeah, we've done that a couple times where it seems like even the words you use and say chaos is that people go, okay, well, there's my license. I'm going to go out and try it.
Right. It gives me permission.
Jeff, your parting advice.
So my parting advice after listening to all this was I just said, hey, you're going to have to be Optimus Prime, like that Transformer. And I think, we all learn something I try and learn something from every day and every interaction I have. And from all these innovators, I learned about myself that I have to be transformative throughout the course of any project, throughout the course of my life as an innovator. That I have to be creative one moment, and then I have to be, linear the next, and then I have to transform into a salesman who can speak eloquently about an idea and bring it to the masses in a way. And I hadn't really contemplated that before we did this show, and it was just really clear to me. So my advice to everybody is be prepared to be Optimus Prime and transform throughout your career as an innovator and throughout every project and throughout every day that you go through this.
I think that's great advice. I mean, both these pieces, I thought when you said Optimus Prime, you were going to say you need to make shitty movies like Michael Bay.
No.
That's good. I'm glad that was not your advice.
No, make millions like he did.
Yeah, I would like by making.
That's the upside.
That's the upside.
That's right.
Of that, it's interesting though. I think about that Optimus Prime piece, and when I tell people and they ask what I do, like for a living, I don't know about you guys, but if you're an innovator, and people ask you what you do, if you actually tell them what you do, typically you get one or two responses. I didn't know that was a job. Was one I didn't know that you could do that for a living. And number two, it is, what you mean, like who, what, like for big companies?
You do focus groups?
Yeah, like you help what, And so my job is, my title says innovation, and that word means so many things to so many people. Is that I often find myself really describing who I am by describing what I don't do. Sometimes. And it's looking for that opportunity to say, no, this is where we capitalize on a shift in culture or a need to understand or a movement toward, X, Y, or Z. And yes, that's something you can actually do. You got to be moldable. You got to be ready to roll. So my advice, and this actually came from a direct quote from Ruben Alcaraz, who works at Purina, and he talked about himself and his own pursuits. And his recommendation, more or less, to other people was to weaponize your curiosity. And I immediately, not to pander, but I immediately thought about, one of our owners, Bob. Bob talks about following his dreams and pursuits and always wanting to be relevant and always meaningful and what he's doing and thought. When I think about what we do and how we do it, and if you can weaponize your curiosity, that innate need to fill a niche or become somebody new or do something, this could be a career for you somehow.
Well, and if you think about how we started with one of these questions, how did we get here?
Yeah.
God knows how I got here.
I mean,
I was a theater major who decided I'm never going to make it. So I'll work for a beer company. That'll be fun. So I went in there, and then I started looking around and listening to these people who were creating all this stuff, and I thought, I think I like this. I think I can do this. And I had this great mentor who threw me a bone, John Newbold. I will thank you forever. And it was like, they gave me O'Doul's because nobody wanted it. And I took it, and the next thing you know, I went into other brands, went into innovation, went into international, which is like a whole other can of worms when you're talking about different things to do. But, don't not open your eyes to what's available out there and what it's all about. I never would have thought I would have ended up here.
I think that to that point, this is not for everybody, but I think it is for, and I'm not going to say the bold, because I'm not trying to build up our careers like we're out there, exploring the known universe. But it's not for the meek either.
No.
And I will say is that, from the 11 conversations we've had, not just one, but a consistent theme is those people couldn't put a point at the beginning of their career and draw a direct correlation to where they are today. They all got there through various ways and means and methodologies. And my argument is, I don't know if you find this job or this job finds you.
That's an interesting point. I think it finds you. If I look back on my career and how I ended up in innovation, it was by happenstance in some level. I was, that orthodoxy breaker and ended up being sidelined away from those orthodoxies and found my home with the island of misfit toys who could do those same things.
It's funny though, is that I've really enjoyed sort of this reflective conversation that we have had looking back at these, interviews with these 11, really unique individuals. And I've thought a lot about, like, my kids, or you'll talk to kids in college, right? And we were talking about this the other day. I've had moments where somebody said, hey, would you come talk to these college kids? Honestly, one of my least favorite things to do. Like, literally, just this is personal, don't like talking to people who have nothing to lose. I really enjoy talking to a group of people who have money on the line. They need, the brand to deliver something new and different. When you're sitting there, pie in the sky and the world is your oyster, you don't give a shit. You don't care enough to get scared into something. It's like my dad used to say, my dad was a pastor, he said, you can never reach anybody at a wedding, but you can hit everybody at a funeral. So I think about that the same way, is that you've got to have some level of investment. And that might be the part about the job that we didn't hear that I really wish we could have dive in more, is that when you find a brand has got nothing to lose or everything to lose, those are pivotal moments for innovation. You guys agree, disagree?
But don't parfait your way out of it.
Can't
parfait your way out of it.
I can remember a very specific moment in my career where somebody was asking me what I wanted to do next, and it was right after, if you'll recall, Toyota had this massive recall and this huge PR problem maybe a decade ago. And I said to the person across the table, I said, I want to go work for Toyota. And they looked at me like, are you crazy? And I said, no, this is an incredible opportunity to help a brand overcome a challenge like none other. Who wouldn't want to be part of that? And the answer is probably most.
But I also think it's an opportunity where you may find that the majority of people are willing to take risks.
Right.
Where sometimes if everything's going along great and you're kind of playing with what you're going to do with the brand, you got to be careful. Should it be a font? Should it be block? Should it be little tweaks? But it's when you've got nothing to lose, people are willing to go, let's try it.
Yeah.
What the heck?
And Brody Dunn said this. He said, innovation is survival.
It is.
And I talked about it in the last show, more or less. But to that point, I think that my parting advice, and I would absolutely 100% agree with, this might not be for you. And Diane, I should have ended with you. I should have started with, what Jeff, started about that idea.
We have to give them hope.
I like the idea, though, is that if you find yourself desiring this level of career or this type of career, I do feel like it's not like being a statistician. It's not like being a computer programmer or somebody who has to learn a very special set of skills that you can go somewhere and pick up. These set of skills, I think, come inherently with a personality and a disposition.
I think that's absolutely true.
Yeah. So, all right, we've got one final section. When we come back, we've got next steps. You're an innovator and you are looking to rework your own career, or you work for a company and you are trying to find a way to change your perspective internally on what that innovation means. Jeff, Diane, and I have spent a lot of time thinking about this. We work in this field, and we've got some great next steps for you. You're listening to Innovation Insiders with Brado Creative Insight. Stick around. We'll be right back. Welcome back, Innovation Insiders. I'm sitting here with Diane and Jeff. We are talking about this pilot season. And so we've had quite a few episodes and some really great conversations with a lot of wonderful clients. I shouldn't listen to so much true crime and didn't come on here and do this show because I'm going to start talking about killers. You know what was a surprise to me, and I'm going to say this before we move on to these next steps, was it's very difficult to have a conversation with someone in corporate America in an open, honest environment when you record it. Do you know, I mean, like when we start thinking about like the hoops that some of our guests needed to go through, and I understand why. I mean, I really do. But it was as innocuous as the questions we were asking were, and it's general. And it's still, I mean, you've got to be pretty careful because it's a pretty litigious environment you guys can be in. That didn't surprise you guys as much as I guess it surprised me.
No, because we worked in big corporations where you had to have media training and you had to make sure legal went through everything before you opened your mouth. So, no.
Well, and if I can build on that, and I think that's why you're seeing a movement towards these companies that will pull an innovation group outside of a big mothership of an organization and allow them to operate as a startup kind of entity without those,
like a Skunk Works, really.
Yeah, without those shackles on them, so that they can operate in the way that's necessary to speak crazy, to do crazy, to express crazy, and still be tethered to the mothership, but outside of it, with the absolute intention at some point to come back inside. And so it allows them to do that.
Yeah, I gotta say this. This is current and relevant to the news. You guys know one of the most interesting restaurants in America, or really in the world, in the last 5 years has been Moto in Chicago. Right now, this was a place where the chef, and I'm going to butcher his name, so I won't even try. He's passed away, but you could eat your menu. Like the menu was actually printed on a tortilla, like some kind of crazy with edible ink, and then he would show up, and it literally had a plate that looked like roadkill, but it was delicious, and it was like just meant to look like it's something that had been run over. He actually created like multiple inventions. He's had patents. His goal was to feed the world for free out of a restaurant in Chicago. He passed away, died. All those chefs, Silicon Valley. They're out there at startups. To your point about being outside the system, is that they didn't just go like find jobs found them, brought that level of innovation out to Silicon Valley, and is now trying to reinvent whatever. I don't know. My question to you guys is, are there pockets of that innovation that you think are happening around the world? And if they are, where are they?
Well, I think Silicon Valley is probably the biggest example, because you go to a Google campus, it's not the campus of corporate America, even though it is a campus.
Right.
You know, it's a whole different culture, it's a whole different vibe. And I think they're not under the same restrictions. Although it's kind of interesting watching what's happening with Facebook, because I think they're right they're right in the middle of probably deciding what the hell are we going to do with ourselves.
Yeah.
So it might be watch this space.
Yeah.
You're thinking about something like that.
That's interesting. I don't know, Jeff, any takeaway from you on this?
Yeah, I mean, having spent time with a lot of these, when it's talking about tech, there's kind of these 3 or 4 centers. Obviously Silicon Valley, but Israel is become known as a tech hub for folks.
The
Research Triangle.
Who's there? And that we were just talking about Waze, right?
Right. It's an Israeli company. And there's a ton of tech coming out of there. If you look at the Research Triangle in Raleigh, huge, tech space there.
Yeah.
Intel runs or Cisco, I think it is, runs their iPrize annually, and that's where it's held. Austin's got some of that vibe going on.
Yeah.
So yes, Silicon Valley, but there's an awful lot of other places too.
The other thing is really interesting to me too is maker spaces. That's one of those pieces that I just find is some of my favorite people to go, deal with, talk with, try to find to be folks that we want to involve in ideation. Is you've got those people who like to hack everyday items into other items. I just find that is the perfect sort of scenario where you get a lot of make it, break it, try it, repeat, and move on.
Can we talk about that for a second? Because because one of the things we haven't talked at all about throughout the series is this idea of prototyping and innovators constantly prototyping and doing things. And I think it's important from an advice standpoint to say, hey, when you're prototyping something, that doesn't mean you're trying to build this high fidelity, fully functional thing. If you can take 2 popsicle sticks and a Super Ball and glue them together in some way, enough that it represents an idea.
What?
I don't know. To represent something that you're trying to communicate.
I'm so in.
Right?
Yeah.
Yes.
Right. So,
I mean, do you think about the shit that we've done with Play-Doh?
that's right. And so, but I think one of, a lot of times innovators go, well, I got to build this thing. No. Like, literally, give it to your 6-year-old and have them create it for you. And as long as you can communicate what it is to a consumer to build on, that's where you need to start.
Or go find a 6-year-old.
Right.
And pull him in the street, off the street.
Right.
And then, you should probably tell his parents, hey, so we're moving toward the end of this segment, and I started this by saying we're going to have some advice. Right now, there's 2 things that we talked about from an advice point of view, and I think we actually have some next steps, some recommendations that are coming out of our pilot season, which this is not the end of Innovation Insiders. This was just the pilot season. And these conversations were so valid that they're actually going to become other pieces of learning. And Diane, we have something for individuals, and then Jeff's going to talk a little bit about an item that we have for organizations.
Starting with a white paper. And kind of the thinking behind it was to create this document that can be shared. So it's going to be kind of our gift to you, if you will. It's designed really for anybody who's curious or maybe already in the innovation trenches. Maybe you want to represent yourself as a thought leader in your company. Maybe this is something you could use as a tool. Ultimately become an annual resource as this process moves forward. But my biggest challenge right now is to keep it under 1,000 pages because there was so much wisdom, if you will, to find the commonalities, but yet this spectrum of these nuggets of brilliance that just might work for your organization, our organization, anybody out there listening.
So that's going to be happening, in the next really few weeks.
I'll get on it, Andy.
And look for an email that's going to be coming out with that information in it. If you don't have an email, I can't encourage you enough right now to send us an email. We'll add you to that list. It's innovation@brado.net. And we'll put you on that list for that white paper, but we'll include you in that consideration for something that would help maybe your organization. Jeff, talk a little bit about that if you don't mind.
Right, so innovation@brado, BRADO.net. Send us an email so that we can add you to that list when we start communicating. One of the other things we know and we've heard from these things is, being an innovator is kind of being on an island sometimes. And it's really nice to have confirmation or somebody to come in and say, hey, let me help bring this message and make sure that people understand the nuances of what an innovator is all about. So we're creating a workshop that we're happy to help come and run on site with you called Breaking Orthodoxies and Creating Opportunities, where we'll take some of the things we've learned from here and we'll help you challenge your own organization to think differently about what innovators do, how they do it, and what they're trying to accomplish in the end. And so send us that email and we'll get you on that list when we send out our blast about this great workshop that we're putting together.
Go ahead, Jeff. Go ahead, Jeff.
Well, it reminds me of something that Mitch said when she said, if you have a culture that's a little bit apprehensive on this, she goes, blame it on the agency. So we bring this in, we'll do this workshop, blame it on us, and we'll push the envelope for you.
And I got to tell you is that both of these resources are free for us. We are the workshop is free limited. There's only so many of those that we're really going to do just based on workflow and other things. But this white paper is going to be a resource. And, by the way, all 3 of us work in innovation. Our guests have come on for free and given us of their time and attention. And we just feel like it's a better gift to everybody if they can share of this learning and this knowledge. So I want to thank you, Jeff. Thank you for joining me. Diane, thank you for being a part of this process. You've been listening to Innovation Insiders with Brado Creative Insight. Once again, you can reach us at innovation@brado.net. Love to hear from you, and we'll include you in all of our future correspondences. Until we talk again, have a great day.